This is the Skeptic Squared podcast.
A safe place to make light of sacred things.
My name is Matt.
And I'm Corinne.
And in this program, we will be discussing current events related to religion, atheism, and skepticism. Our goal is not to insult believers,
Although that will probably happen from time to time.
but rather to share our point of view on these topics in a way which will benefit and entertain others.
Or maybe we just want to stroke our own egos. You decide.
Hello, and welcome to the Skeptic Squared podcast. Today is Sunday, March 6th, 2016, and with me is my lovely wife, Corinne.
Hello.
How are you doing, Corinne?
I'm alright.
You all right?
Yeah.
Had a little bit of a disappointment this morning.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay. We don't have to get into it.
No.
Yeah,
It's okay.
it's okay.
It's not the end of the world.
And for those of you who think that we're talking about something ominous, we're talking about a cake.
Yeah.
It's a disappointment.
Yeah. No worries.
It's okay. We're going to work it out. All right. So today we have a little bit of a shorter show. We have some time constraints and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why that was funny, but it's funny.
As long as it's funny. So we have a couple of articles that we want to go over.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead and start. I have an article from fairmormon.org. Are you familiar with Fair Mormon?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I almost said yes, ma'am, and I don't know why. You do not look like a woman.
That's my great bushy beard. Okay, so Fair Mormon is a Mormon apologetic group. It's one of the more respected ones that are available. Mm-hmm. They say that they have a bunch of members of academia, in particular BYU, which isn't that surprising because BYU is a Mormon university, and so it makes sense that they would have
Full of apologists.
right. Yeah, exactly. Everything at BYU has a Mormon color to it. You know, everything is from the perspective that the Mormon Church is true. Mm-hmm. So I found an article. This is. If you go to their topical outline page or whatever, there's a bunch of different topics that you can look at, and I found a link to questions from atheists, right? Mormon responses to atheism is the page. And the very first thing that they have is subjective revelation. Okay. Which for me is one of the main things. In fact, this is the main thing on their page for atheists is just the idea that revelation is subjective, and that is a common criticism. And the article itself, from my perspective, the way that when I read it, seemed to really avoid the core of the question. Okay, the question that when atheists bring up the idea that revelation is subjective. They're not saying, like this article points out, that atheists are saying that Mormons are just basing all of their decisions on emotion and everything they believe is based on emotion, and so they don't have a real reason for believing what they believe. Okay, that's not exactly what atheists are saying when they bring up the idea that emotions are subjective, or that revelation is subjective or emotional, or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. What the real issue is that Mormons don't have a way of differentiating between emotion and the divine, or divine inspiration. That's what atheists are pointing out. They're saying you don't have a tool or a mechanism or any way that you can reliably demonstrate that there is a difference between what you are saying is a spiritual, supernatural experience and what might be explained through natural processes. Like, say, something just going on in your mind or an emotion or that kind of thing. So therefore, if you don't have a real reason to say that this is divinely inspired or God talking to you, then it probably is just emotion. That's more or less the argument from atheists. So that's been my argument. And that was something that was key for me when I started having doubts, was realizing that I didn't have a real tool to differentiate between those things. How could I really say that one is inspired by God and one is just emotion?
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you ever thought about the difference between emotion and the promptings of the spirit, as Mormons like to say?
When I was in Mormonism, not really. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I think
Did it
I
ever
just
come
felt
up?
like, I don't know, because I feel like growing up, I mean, I was taught, if it feels good, then it's right. If it feels bad, then it's wrong. And so I kind of just mixed the two together. And so I felt like if it felt right to me, then it was...
Did anybody ever try to explain how you know that what you feel is good or what you feel good about is from God? Anything like that?
Oh, man. I don't know.
Because to me, that's the core of the issue,
Is how do you know it's from God?
Exactly.
Because it's good.
Because it's good. And that's...
Right,
and
it's just that
clip,
circular logic, like the whole Bednar thing.
Exactly, like the clip that we had from Bednar a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, that Bednar clip is pretty much what I remember learning, or at least understanding about revelation. I never felt like I ever really received personal revelation. There were only a few times that I can recall that I believe we've already talked about on the podcast about when I felt like I had received an answer. But then looking back, it was like, really, I just had really good reasons to not do something.
Right.
And followed that instinct and just counted it as being revelation. So. Right.
You gave an example. Was it your interview one that we did in the first episode where you talk about the trip to Europe?
Yeah.
And how you felt inspired to do this or that or whatever.
Right. So that was, I wanted to go back to England. I had found a longer study abroad program. It would have been like for a summer. Kind of doing a film internship type thing in England, and that just sounded amazing.
Still does.
It still does. But the biggest thing was that it was really expensive, and I was a little bit short. If I had picked up a couple of odd jobs or something, I could have made it work. But the problem was you don't get paid on those things, and so I would have come back without any money. And so that's the big thing for me. Money has always been a huge issue for me. And so, I mean, that was the real reason why I decided that it would be a dumb reason to go. It's I would come back with nothing. I would be living with my parents for a long time. I wouldn't have...
It would set you back a ways.
It would set me back a long ways. And I was already 22-ish. And I felt like at that point I needed to be out of my parents' house.
Right, like most 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
They just don't want to be around their parents that much.
Right. Although I'd say the majority of 22-year-olds, at least in Utah, still live with their parents.
Do you think so?
I think a lot of them do, unless they're going to school still. I just think the economy just doesn't really allow for people to live on their own very much.
Yeah, it does seem
at
to
least
be
not
a bit
right
harder.
out of college. If you find a good job right out of college, it just doesn't happen that way all the
Consider
time
yourself
anymore.
lucky.
Exactly.
Or inspired.
Right.
So early on, I realized that I didn't really have any experiences like these spiritual experiences that people keep talking about. Despite, multiple attempts to have God, for instance, tell me that he exists or that the Book of Mormon is true, the church is true, that kind of stuff. The very basic stuff, the stuff that Mormon missionaries will tell you in the first or second discussion. If you ask God these questions, you will get an inspired answer from God. Okay? And despite years of attempts to have that happen, it never happened to me. Or it never happened in a way that, again, I could only explain through inspiration from God or supernatural stuff. It's I always fell back on, well, I kind of want it to be true. I kind of want this to be this way and this to be this way. I wanted the Book of Mormon to be true and the church to be true so that I could have all the stuff promised to me about eternal families and just, even, just having harmony in the home here on earth and all that kind of stuff and being blessed in those sorts of ways. There's lots of reasons to want those things. And I did want those things, but it never happened for me, And I remember when I was growing up, being kind of troubled by this, but never really talking about it and wouldn't really think about it very much. But, every once in a while, kids, especially teenagers, will be asked to give talks in sacrament meeting, right? And whenever they would ask me to give a talk, one of my go-to stories for spiritual experiences was an instance that happened on a family vacation, a family reunion down in California.
Oh.
I've told you this story.
I remember now.
Yeah. So I was about 2 years old. I think I was about to turn 3, and my older brother was like 5 or 6, and we were wandering around the campsite that we were staying with all of our extended family. And there's this hill that goes up to a road, okay? And, there's lots of bushes, lots of rocks, and some of the rocks are really big. And, it's just a fun place for a couple of little kids to just go exploring and look for bugs and that kind of stuff. And so that's what we were doing, me and Jason. We were wandering around, and we got like halfway up the hill, and we were worried that we were lost. Okay.
Now, you were just worried you were lost.
Right.
I thought you were legitimately lost.
We thought we were lost. We could still see the camp.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. We could still see the camp.
Okay, so this is imagination time.
Well, it's little kids.
Yeah.
like in your mind, things seem a lot farther than they
Right.
actually are because you don't have, that kind of perception. Because you're just a little kid. And so we thought we were lost, even though we could still see the camp. And we got behind this big boulder, and we decided to say a prayer. So Jason, being the older one, said the prayer that we would be able to find our way back to our families. Okay. And then we kept going up the hill. We didn't think to go down the hill where we had come from.
That's funny.
We kept going up the hill, and we got to the road, and along the road, like we knew to turn left because that was where the candy shack was, like this little hut with candy bars and ice cream and that kind of stuff. So we started going down that way, and then the store owner noticed us and was like, "Hey, are you guys from the camp just down there? Just down the hill?" It's like, "Yeah," and so they walked us down, and took us down to the camp, and my mom was just coming out of the shower, and so that's why she didn't know where we were.
Right.
And so she was gone. She was in the shower for like 10-15 minutes, and nobody was really keeping an eye on us, so we were gone for about 10-15 minutes. But in our minds, we were on this grand adventure, right? And we had said a prayer, and then the prayer was answered because we found our way back to the camp. When in reality we had just gone in a circle of about 100 feet for about 10-15 minutes.
That's funny.
But this was the fallback story. It's cute, and it's you
Right.
have little kids, and so people are interested in that kind of thing. But it's not a really serious story. It's not the kind of story that people point to as a conversion story,
Right.
Or a legitimate answer to a prayer. It's just a cute story, and it always kind of bothered me that this was the story that I had to fall back on because that's the only story I really had,
Right.
and it wasn't even me who said the prayer. Okay, so going back to the article, so they start with a question. Is a burning in the bosom, which is what Mormons call like that sensation that you get when God is talking to you, okay? Is a burning in the bosom simply a subjective, emotion-based, unreliable way to practice self-deception?
Wait, read that again?
Okay, so this is a very loaded question.
Okay.
Is a burning in the bosom simply a subjective, emotion-based, unreliable way to practice self-deception? In other words, you're fooling yourself into believing that Mormonism is true by wanting it to be true and then feeling an emotion and then saying that emotion is God because you want that to be God. Okay.
Okay.
I know it's
Yes.
a weird it's a weird way of putting it, I think. So that's the question that they're posing.
Okay.
Is it simply emotion-based and self-deception? And so
Yes.
so they have different sections. The first section is it is a fundamental misunderstanding or mistreatment to say that the Latter-day Saint revelatory experience is exclusively or primarily emotional.
Okay.
So this paragraph basically goes on to say that Mormon revelation isn't just emotion. It also includes intellect and reason and those kinds of things. So they're saying that emotion is part of it, but
That's
it's not exclusive.
revelation, though. If you're using your intellect, right, or your own reason, that's not a revelation.
Yeah, so here's, let's see, one point in it. It says, the LDS concept of human experience is not one where we are carved up into separate, rigid compartments labeled emotional, intellectual, and physical. The LDS approach to human experience is holistic and involves all of our faculties operating simultaneously and inexorably. According to LDS scripture, the spirit and the body are the soul of man. We are greater than the mere sum of our inner and outer parts. So again, it doesn't really even address the issue of whether or not revelation is mere emotion. It's saying that emotion is only a part of it.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, just seeing like revelation coming down from the church, I mean, I would agree with their assessment, but I don't think that's legitimately what revelation was meant to be. You know, when they first came up with that word.
Right.
That is not what revelation was supposed to be.
Right. In the early days of the church, revelation was very much like Pentecostalism, where you would have convulsions and you'd feel, overwhelmed and start speaking in tongues, and you just kind of lose your mind and the Spirit of God and that kind of stuff. And when you look at the early accounts of, say, the dedication of their first temple, that's exactly what happened. People started falling on the floor talking in tongues, and then Brigham Young stood up and started interpreting the tongues and saying, this is what he's saying. And then the guy's like, blah, 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 and he doesn't even know what he's supposed to be saying, and that in their mind was a fulfillment of that one scripture in the New Testament that talks about at the end of the days they will speak in tongues and there will be interpretation of tongues and all that kind of stuff, which is very different from how Mormons view speaking in tongues and interpreting tongues now, which is almost exclusively missionaries learning how to speak a foreign language.
Yeah. Yep.
So the next section is a Latter-day Saint spiritual experience. It has intellectual content as well as emotional elements of peace or joy. So again, kind of reiterating the idea that it's not just emotion.
But what was the part about peace or joy?
A Latter-day Saint spiritual experience has intellectual content as well as emotional elements of peace or joy. Okay. So the emotion that you feel when God is talking to you is peace and joy. Okay? But they don't ever say how you know that feeling peace and joy is God talking to you.
Well, because if it wasn't peace or joy, it wouldn't be God talking to you.
Right.
Oh, sorry. Revelation. That's something I feel like I need to do some research on. So, I don't know.
The next section, I just kind of want to go through this quickly. The end is the more interesting part. Talk of feelings does not mean simply experiencing an emotion. So feelings and emotion are different, apparently.
Do they explain that?
I can read, let's see, they have a quote from Hugh Nibley, who's an old LDS scholar. He had this to say. He cannot conceive how anyone could possibly acquire knowledge or any method other than his. He cannot believe that any man has experienced anything which he has not experienced. I have never seen a vision, says the skeptic, therefore Joseph Smith never had one. I have seen dreams or had emotionally moving experiences, therefore I will allow him that.
What? Read that last part again.
I have never seen a vision, says the skeptic. Therefore, Joseph Smith never had one. I have seen dreams or had emotionally moving experiences. Therefore, I will allow him that.
So that's how they're explaining how feelings and emotions are different?
Well, they're explaining how the skeptic thinks. They're saying that people who discredit revelation are discrediting it simply because they've never had one. It's like, well, that doesn't explain how you know that your revelation is really a revelation.
Right.
Let me backtrack a little bit. So here's what they say at the very beginning of the section. To be sure, many church members will talk about how they felt when they prayed and had other experiences with God. However, it is to fundamentally misunderstand these experiences to assume, as critics often do, that talk of feelings means simply or only or primarily experiencing an emotion. What's lacking from these descriptions is vocabulary. So you can't describe it because it's so wonderful, I guess. The problem with them is more semantic than it is substantial. The LDS member is stymied, in a sense, because there is no good available word for what happens during a spiritual experience. Again, it's just indescribably wonderful. These experiences are ineffable. By definition, they defy description. Since few of us have the poetic and metaphorical powers of prophets like Isaiah and John, we are left to try our best to convey what we've experienced in words laden with secular connotations, which critics can misinterpret if they so choose. And then we have the quote from Hugh Nibley about the critic saying that he's never had a revelation, therefore Joseph can't have had a revelation. Does that make any sense to you?
I'm just hung up on the very first part that feelings and emotions aren't the same thing. Mm-hmm. Because they are the same thing. They are synonyms of each other.
Right.
Look it up. They're
Right.
They're synonymous.
Right. Yeah, the thing that stands out to me, of course, is the idea that they're trying to say that spiritual experiences or revelations are just so wonderful that you just know that they're from God, and you can't really describe it because it's just so wonderful.
Right. So if that's the case, that's fine. Mm-hmm. You can have a revelation, but you can't expect your revelation to convert someone else.
Yeah. And Mormons would say that you would need your own revelation. But again, the problem is you can't, like for me, I tried. I
Right.
really tried, and I never had an inexplicably wonderful experience that could only be explained through revelation from God. It just never happened.
I don't know. I just feel like a revelation from the church, like if you need to have your own revelation, then they need to respect that if your revelation is different from theirs, that it's still legit. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
The church tries to walk that line sometimes, but ultimately they have to say that your personal revelation has to jive with our church revelation, otherwise it's not from God. That's how you
Right.
you see if it's from the devil or whatever. Yeah.
Revelation is sticky.
Right, but that's just a circular argument in and of itself to say
Yeah.
that the only real revelations are ones that agree with us. You
Right.
know? Which is basically what that argument is.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah. So I'll just read the headline for this section. We don't have to get into it. Early Christians experienced similar feelings to a burning in the bosom. They're trying to justify, the history of it. Here's a quote from Dallin H. Oakes, where he tries to explain the burning in the bosom, I guess. He says, "What does a burning in the bosom mean? Does it mean to be a feeling of caloric heat?" Which would be like the scientific way of explaining it, right? Like the burning produced by combustion. If that is the meaning, I have never had a burning in the bosom. Mm-hmm. Surely the word burning in this scripture signifies a feeling of comfort and serenity. That is the witness many receive. That is the way revelation works.
Okay.
So he's saying that you know that revelation is revelation because it brings you comfort and serenity.
Okay.
How do you know that?
How do you know that
Right.
it's brought you comfort?
He's saying that the burning described in Scripture from Revelation, receiving a revelation, signifies a feeling of comfort and serenity. That's how you know that it's from God. You get comfort and serenity.
Mm-hmm.
It's the peace and joy.
Okay.
Right? How do you know that that's from God? That's the question.
It's just circular. Mm-hmm. You know it's from God because it feels good. Mm-hmm. You know it's good because it's from God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no way out of that circle.
Exactly. And that's the question that atheists keep pointing out, and nobody gives them a satisfactory answer for.
Right. Because they don't have one. They can't give a satisfactory answer without completely tearing apart their argument.
Exactly. Because they don't have an argument.
Exactly.
And this whole article is attempting to present a word salad to confuse people and give them this false sense that they have a reasonable answer to this question.
Right. But it's nothing new. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like this is all stuff that I learned.
Yeah, this is all stuff you would hear in church.
So, real quick. So the whole comfort and serenity thing, as far as Revelation is concerned. So, in Fast and Testimony meeting, the whole, like when you feel prompted, quote unquote, to go up and give your testimony. Uh-huh. Did you ever feel like that burning in your bosom or whatever?
I always felt extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah. Okay.
I never went up and bore my testimony.
So, back when I was still in Mormonism or whatever, I felt like I never really felt the burning in your bosom unless it was fast and testimony meeting. And it was after I was like, gosh, I haven't borne my testimony in like 3 years. I should probably go up and bear my testimony. And then, I would start thinking about it. It's like, I really don't want to, but I should, but I don't want to. And it's just like this perpetual, like, whirling of emotions inside my head. Like, I really don't want to do it, but I should do it. And
it's the guilt trip that they give you at the beginning of the meeting.
It's a guilt trip, but it also, when I get really anxious, I get that burning in my bosom. My heart beats really, really fast. I feel really warm, but it's really uncomfortable. Like
right, because your heart rate is increasing.
Yeah.
You get a little flush, goosebumps, all that kind of stuff.
Every once in a while I'd go up and actually do it, but it was like, it's the worst feeling ever.
Yeah.
Like, I hated when I thought that I was feeling the Spirit because it never felt good.
It was uncomfortable.
It was so uncomfortable.
That's an interesting point. I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
I just always... whenever I would feel that way, like feeling the guilt trip, I always recognized that it was a guilt trip, and I never associated it with the Spirit.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not just going to get up and start talking because you're trying to guilt trip me into it.
I was just like, I don't know what to talk about.
Right.
I don't really have a testimony.
So here's the second question that they pose. Why do critics of Mormonism who belong to other religions discount spiritual experiences?
I don't know. Do they?
Some of them do.
Is it just because it's just in the wrong religion?
Yeah, that's more or less all it is. But and it's an interesting thing for them to point this out. And again, I don't really want to get into it because it's not that important to the argument. They're pointing out the hypocrisy of other Christians, for instance, saying that Mormon revelation isn't legitimate when they claim to have revelation or inspiration from God through similar methods. But Mormons do the exact same thing in reverse. They discredit all revelation from other people, from other religions, and say that their religion is the most special or the most correct.
Right.
Like, but how do you know that yours is better than theirs? How do they know that theirs is better than yours? It's like
from Revelation.
From Revelation, yes. It's like a Seitan Bruggencate argument. The
you presuppose.
the presuppositionalist argument. You know that there's a God. You're just denying that God is real, and I know that God exists because God has told me in such a way that I can be certain that He exists. It's like that's not a real argument. You're just saying. You're basically saying that anybody who disagrees with you is lying. That's not an honest argument.
No.
And
it's not something you can prove.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't provide a reason for why you're right.
Right.
So I'll skip this particular section. So the last thing that they have in this is an article from Dr. Wendy Ulrich. She's a psychologist, a Mormon psychologist, who they point out has been a licensed psychologist with over 25 years of experience. Okay, because that's important for some reason.
Does it say where she graduated from?
Not in this article, they don't. So she has a very, very long article, so I won't go through all of it. There's a couple of highlights that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so she says, often in the church we encourage people to look for such feelings and experiences as evidence of God's hand, or of the truthfulness of the church's message. Yet, people from many religious backgrounds can have such experiences. Okay, so she's a proponent of the idea that that Mormons don't have a monopoly on the truth. Okay, they just have the whole truth.
Right.
She goes on. How do the goosebumps and tearfulness I experience when someone speaks in a testimony meeting differ from the goosebumps and tearfulness I experience when the 4:00 parade begins at Disneyland? Okay, which is something that we've talked about before. Critics may conclude there is no real difference, that feelings are not trustworthy or related to the Spirit, and that church members are being misled by missionaries who teach them that such experiences are the Holy Ghost testifying to them of the truth. I would amend that by saying that it's not critics concluding that there's no difference, it's critics pointing out that you haven't demonstrated that there is a difference.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And again, this whole article avoids that issue. They never talk about how you can tell that there is a difference. And I read through most of this lady's article. It's external to the Fair Mormon site. And she never really answers it. She just says, we have intellect, we have feelings, we have reason. It's all
but
the
you're
stuff.
basing that on an emotion.
Mm-hmm. And she never gives a real demonstrable way or concrete way of differentiating between revelation and just feelings. They never get to it, Uh-huh. Okay, so here's one thing that she says on her article. Fortunately, we are not left with emotion alone to discern God's hand in our lives. Reason, experience, counsel from others, and other forms of revelation, she's calling all of those revelation, by the way, may all assist us. In fact, I notice that emotion plays into only some of my spiritual experiences, and often only in a secondary way. More often, the spiritual promptings and confirmations I receive come very quietly, as something simply occurs to me, with a kind of righteousness that has no real emotion attached to it. To me, that sounds like she's saying that it's not just emotion that's revelation, it's also your conscience that's revelation. Mm-hmm. Which goes hand in hand with the thing that Bednar was saying, right. And I pointed out that Mormons are really good at calling their own conscience God. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But again, how do you know that it's God? Mm-hmm. How do you know?
Right.
Anyway, that's about all I have from this article. Do you have anything to add or questions about it?
Oh, well, no.
Should we just move on?
Yeah, let's just move on.
Okay.
We can do like a whole segment, I think, on Revelation.
Right. Okay, so do you want to do one of your articles?
Sure. Both of mine are a lot shorter, so if we don't have much to discuss, that's okay. So I found this one. Someone on Facebook liked it again. Mm-hmm. It's about Eliza R. Snow.
Okay.
Do you know who that is?
She was one of the people who signed an affidavit claiming that Joseph Smith was not a polygamist, while she herself was one of Joseph Smith's polygamous wives.
Yes. Okay, so Eliza R. Snow, she's like, to women in the church, Eliza R. Snow is like a role model. Mm-hmm. They really like Eliza R. Snow. She was a powerful woman in the church.
After all, she's one of the few that has a name.
She's not in scripture though, so that
I guess that's
doesn't
true.
work. Okay, anyway, so this article, it's basically that there's shocking news that Eliza R. Snow was gang raped when they were in Missouri. Okay. I feel like I knew that. It may have been on Mormon Think, but I can't confirm that, so don't hold me to it.
Okay.
Anyway, so the article is just about how they've revealed that they think that Eliza R. Snow was gang raped while they were in Missouri, and that it was such a violent thing that's the reason she was infertile and she couldn't have kids. And then after that, she married Joseph Smith because he offered her eternal life and said that she could still have celestial children, if he would join her, if she would join him in polygamy. Basically. So I just kind of wanted to bring it up.
Manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. Coercion. He took advantage of a downtrodden woman, basically. So I just kind of wanted to talk about, one, it happened in Missouri, and two, it led to her becoming a polygamous wife of Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young.
Okay.
They're not things that they really, really touch on, but I feel like the article is alluding to this was one of the reasons why tensions were so high in Missouri and why they eventually left. Just blaming the people in Missouri.
Oh, I see what
you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So just never taking accountability for the part that Mormons played in the situation.
Right. They only ever say that, tensions were high, stuff like that. They never say that Mormons actually had a part to play in it.
Right.
While I would never condone someone raping someone. I mean, the thing that they never talk about is that there were, the Mormons were bringing it on themselves. I don't know.
You want to elaborate on how they were bringing it on themselves?
Well, they were trying to take over the government in Missouri. They wouldn't trade with anyone else in the town that wasn't LDS, and so they had a monopoly on goods. They were trying to infiltrate the governmental system so that they could control the state.
Right. They were trying to vote as a bloc
Yeah.
and have complete control over everything and
Right.
influence everybody else's lives. It's similar to how they do it in Utah now, except it's probably less extreme now because
Right.
eyes are on them and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you look at the smaller communities like in southern Utah, and it's very insular. There's this close-knit core, and anybody who's an outsider becomes ostracized. And you can see some of that even in like Salt Lake, that's very progressive. But if you're not in the in group, if you're not a Mormon, then a lot of people will shun you or not associate with you, not buy your stuff or work with you professionally. In fact, now that you're mentioning it, I read something on Reddit this week where a parent was complaining about how their kid, who was in, I think, the second grade, was being bullied for not being a Mormon. The other classmates were like, saying like, we're not going to play with you. Everybody run away from them. They're not Mormons. They don't go to church. Everybody, go over here and leave them over there. Like that kind of stuff, like at recess. And, and most of this was apparently happening behind the teacher's back. So you can't really blame the teacher, but you can certainly blame Mormonism and Mormon parents and that kind of thing, creating this culture of us versus them.
Yeah.
People who aren't with us are against us, which is very much a Mormon mentality.
And you can't associate with the enemy.
Yeah, well, most Mormons that I can remember, like growing up, were fine with us associating with other non-Mormons.
But when you're young, it's like so
date.
black and white.
Yeah, but we weren't allowed to date them. We weren't allowed to do certain things with them, and it all had to be couched with us being a good example for them, so that someday they'll look back at us as like the good Mormon that they knew.
Like, and I knew someone that was Mormon.
And then
I'll join the church.
Exactly. It was all about being a missionary, So it wasn't about ostracizing them. It was about trying to get them to conform.
Right.
But in Utah, I've heard lots and lots of horror stories of people being pushed aside just because they aren't Mormon.
Right. Yeah. Oh, and then just the polygamy thing. It was like you said, she just basically was taken advantage of because Joseph Smith approached her and was like, I can still offer you this. You just need to join my wives. Which I have a really big problem with. And then she married Brigham Young after.
Right. Well, most of Joseph Smith's wives married Brigham Young.
Yeah. That's how we ended up with, 55?
Right.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just wanted to kind of bring that up.
Okay.
Nothing profound to say.
Nothing profound.
Just that the article kind of irked me.
Okay, so one of the other articles that I have, it's two articles that are linked together.
Okay.
So this was in the Deseret News, which we've talked about before. And they pulled an article or a blog post, Facebook post actually, here it is, where a man named Rich Miller posted his experience of losing his faith and then coming back to the church.
Okay.
His original post is titled How I Lost and Regained My Faith, which was posted July 15th, 2014. And then he had a follow-up article that came later that we'll get to, where he basically just continues his post. Basically, this whole thing is him saying, different things that he learned by leaving the church and then coming back, which is an interesting tale, right?
Right.
But it is kind of long, so we're just going to kind of hit the bullet points. He has 18 lessons that he learned from this experience, okay, in the first article, and then an additional 9 things that he learned in the second article. So it's quite a few things. So if you want to talk about one, just interrupt me, and
Okay.
and we can talk about it more in depth. But I'm just going to kind of go through the list. Lesson number 1: cynicism creates a numbness toward life.
Okay.
Okay.
They have a thing against cynics.
Right. Which I guess I understand.
Yeah,
but,
I kind of get it.
But the problem, though, is that they often associate cynics with skeptics, which are not the same thing. No. And they dismiss them out of hand. They dismiss all of their criticisms. And so they lump everybody that is critical of the church as a cynic.
Right.
Lesson number 2, we are not alone. This is all about how God exists. Lesson number 3, instant gratification is counterfeit happiness. Those are loaded words in the Mormon vernacular.
Yeah. It ties in with the whole self-mastery thing, I think. It's like they think anything, I don't know, instant gratification for them is like covers a broad range of things.
It's anything that they say you're not supposed to do.
Right.
Like doing drugs, drinking alcohol, having sex with somebody that you just met. You know, any of those sorts of things. Watching an R-rated movie. It makes you happy in the short term, but it's not going to bring you lasting, eternal happiness that we're promising through our religion.
Yeah.
You know.
Ugh, I hate that.
Yeah.
Instant gratification.
Right. Lesson number 4, commandments, laws, and rules help you learn. Okay. They're trying to justify the fact that Mormons have a lot of prohibitions and rules and stuff. Because it's for your benefit. You get to learn so many things by not ever doing anything.
Right.
You know, becoming the most boring person alive, you get to be the most learned.
Basically, you're just learning how to follow rules, though.
That's all
you're
it
not
is,
learning how to think for yourself.
Right, which is something that we've talked about quite a bit.
Right. It's like you need to be allowed to make the mistakes.
Yeah.
And learn from that.
Yeah. And not have the threat of eternal punishment just lumped onto the natural consequences of making a bad decision. You know. Lesson number 5, you're not the exception to the rule.
Okay.
So, okay. Not a whole lot to say about that.
No.
It's lesson number 6. It's the daily little decisions in life that determine your destiny.
Okay.
Sounds like a bit of a deepity to me.
Yeah.
It's like the more you think about it, the more absurd it becomes.
So my deciding not to go through with that first idea for a cake is going to determine my eternal destiny.
Apparently.
All right.
And a butterfly flaps its wings in Japan and, you know, whatever.
Right.
Number 7. You can be guilt-free and clean of your past mistakes.
Okay.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it's all about the Mormon idea of repentance, which to me is absurd because you're asking for a third party that wasn't involved or injured in the original incident to forgive you for the incident.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. So I kind of agree with that. You can eventually not feel guilty about something. What was the second part?
You can be guilt-free and clean
Okay.
of your past
It's
mistakes.
clean. Mostly it's just the guilt-free that I agree with. But I don't think that necessarily comes within the church.
No.
Like, I felt guilty for things that happened in the church for a long time. And now I can finally say I no longer feel guilty about those things because I realized they weren't actually wrong.
Right, because they add, again, lots of baggage and tell you that you should feel guilty about these things over here if you do them. And when you realize that the church isn't true and you walk away from it, all of a sudden, all that guilt that was associated with you doing those things is gone.
Yeah, the whole idea of suddenly feeling lighter,
Yeah.
that was legitimately true for me.
Yeah. Oh, for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Number 8, surprise, everyone who goes to church is not yet perfect.
Which they love to tell you over and over and over again in like every lesson. Nobody is perfect, which just, it does nothing for your ego.
And the thing that bothers me about that whole idea is that they try to extend it to the top leaders, the apostles and the first presidency, right?
Because they can speak as men.
Right, because they speak as men, and they want you to, you know, as they say, give them a break. But they won't ever talk about any of the things that you should give them a break for.
Nope.
What are the things that they actually did that were mistakes? You can't get a straight answer from a Mormon about that. They won't ever admit to a real mistake that a leader did, but they want you to just acknowledge that they made mistakes and then forgive them for it.
Right.
You know, which would be fine if we weren't talking about people like, say, Joseph Smith manipulating Eliza R. Snow to be his polygamous wife.
Right. Right.
You know, like those sorts of things are beyond just making a mistake.
Well, I would say probably like the whole blacks in the priesthood thing. That was definitely a mistake that people point to and would bring up. That those leaders
Like
were
Brigham Young
speaking as men.
was a racist.
Yeah.
And so that influenced his policies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I would say that they would more or less say that those were mistakes that those men made.
Yeah.
And eventually I would say that homosexuality will probably be along the same lines.
Yeah, and those sorts of things, it just betrays the cultural influence that the church
Right.
really does have
Yeah.
that they don't want to admit that they have. You know,
Exactly.
but the problem with that, though, is that it doesn't apply to the racism in the Book of Mormon that talks about people having a curse of black skin and being righteous and having that curse taken away, so their skin becomes lighter again and all that kind of stuff. Like, that is extremely racist, and it can't just be brushed under the rug by saying that the person that wrote it was a mere man, because this
Right.
is in Scripture. This is inspired by God.
Yep.
They can't just walk away from that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I see that.
Number 9, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. This is a quote from Aristotle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
that's true,
Yeah, that's
but
true.
how are you applying that?
right.
Are you saying that everyone outside of the church isn't entertaining thoughts without believing them to be true?
Do you want me to read what he has to say?
Yeah.
Okay. It's natural to judge people you don't understand. We've all done it, but we need to learn to practice empathetic listening with each other. We need to try to understand each other's point of view fully before casting judgment or doubt. For example, do LDS members try to protect their children from the darkness and bad influence in the world while trying to help them establish a solid foundation built on universal principles before sending them out into the world to fend for themselves? Yes. But isn't that what any good parent should do? Unfortunately, for this reason, LDS churchgoers are often viewed as naive and close-minded. Does that clear it up for you?
So is he implying that people that think that they're naive aren't understanding their point of view fully?
Right, so he's saying that people looking at LDS members as naive, which is something that I'm guilty of,
Yeah.
are not taking into account that it is possible for the person that they think is naive to actually understand what's going on and choose not to engage in it or whatever. It's the being in the world but not of the world kind of idea. It's not the same thing as naivete, is what he's saying. I think that's Bullock's.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with him that you should try and understand the other viewpoint
Right.
more fully before passing judgment. But
Right. The quote from Aristotle
but
is
I
fine.
feel, yeah, the quote from Aristotle is fine, but I feel like Mormons are more guilty of not doing that than people outside of Mormonism. At least, like,
Oh, yeah. Mormons are very judgmental.
yeah, they're extremely judgmental. And I mean, I feel like skeptics, atheists, like, they're all right with letting them believe in Mormonism, but it's
Right.
like, once you cross the line of it, like, actually hurting someone.
I should clarify, it's not just Mormons. I think it's any form of fundamentalism where you have a list of prohibitions. It breeds judgmentalism.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
because anybody that's not following those prohibitions or those rules is seen as not being faithful, not being righteous. And if they're not being faithful and righteous, what are they?
right.
Wicked.
Imperfect people.
Yeah. Number 10. You get as much out of something as you put in.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine too.
Right. Number 11, the Book of Mormon will help you come unto Christ.
Only if you believe that it's true.
Yeah. Right.
But
There's,
you have to believe it's true before that can happen.
yeah, there's a ton of assumptions being made in these.
Yeah.
Number 12, weird is a relative term, and often things are only weird to us when we don't understand them.
Is that like in reference to Mormon culture?
Probably. Like people that, again, it's the outsider looking in,
Right.
not understanding, that kind of thing.
Mormons are legitimately weird.
Yeah. And
Even
they pride
as a
themselves on
Mormon,
it.
even as a Mormon, I felt that Mormons were weird. Like, it's
Yeah.
just a weird culture.
It is. It's quirky and
Yeah.
it's odd and,
Yeah.
and they pride themselves on it because was it in the late 90s, Gordon B. Hinckley, the prophet at the time, said that we are a peculiar people
Yeah.
and wanted people to embrace that kind of
Right.
idea.
Right, and I'm fine with quirkiness and eccentricities, but like when you're expected to embrace that yourself, it's like that goes back to the whole idea of conformity. You have to
Right.
conform to the peculiarities.
Yeah, and a lot of the peculiar things that people point to are attempts by Mormons to justify the fact that they don't drink, they don't party, they don't smoke, they don't do drugs, they don't do these things that lots of people do to have fun or to let loose and that kind of stuff. And they say, look, we can have just as much fun as anybody who drinks.
Right.
We can be just as zany and weird.
Yeah.
Which is just a weird argument for them to make altogether. Moving on, 13, LDS members don't think they're better than everyone. You're trying not to laugh.
Well, I mean, that's like a huge generalization. Because I know Mormons that think they're better than other people.
Oh, yeah.
You can't say every single Mormon thinks that they're better than everyone else that isn't a Mormon. Even Mormons within Mormonism think they're better than other Mormons within Mormonism.
Absolutely. I've heard members of my own family make that argument.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned once that my mom is very anti-abortion, and she said once to me that if she found out that a member of her congregation was in favor of pro-choice, then she would think that they weren't a very good Mormon. Like, she said that.
Yep.
And that's not an uncommon view. And that's because they associate following these rules and following the prohibitions and all that kind of stuff. It's all tied with their worthiness, with their righteousness. And so, of course, it's going to breed judgmentalism.
Right.
I can't see any way that it wouldn't.
Right.
Number 14, working in the Lord's vineyard is awesome.
So doing missionary work?
Presumably, yeah.
Okay.
Just doing stuff that the church wants you to do. So, yeah, the first line is talking about serving, holding callings, working in the church, and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, it's just doing anything that the church tells you that you're supposed to do. And it's awesome. Doing what the church tells you to do is awesome. Everything is awesome. 15, listen to wise advice and learn from others.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. I might question what he considers to be wise, but...
Right, if he's saying that only Mormon prophets are wise, then that I have an issue with that.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Like, you can't go outside of Mormonism. You just can't. As soon as you do that and you start believing something a little bit different, or that gives you a different opinion, it's like you're listening to the wrong people. You're reading the wrong things. That person isn't actually wise. They're trying to deceive you. It's annoying.
Yeah. Okay. Let's kind of hurry through this. Let's see. So 16, don't let what you don't know keep you from following what you do know. So, in other words, don't let your doubts change your mind about stuff.
Right.
17, listen to your conscience, because again, conscience is God. 18, I want to share my happiness with others. So, be a good missionary.
Okay.
No.
Sorry, okay. Leaned back a little too far.
So the second article came out this week, which is why it's in the Deseret News again. So the first one is, everyone has or will experience a crisis of faith on some level in their life.
Okay.
Which is probably true.
Yeah.
The difference is probably that some people just really can't reconcile their faith with their doubts, and so they have to walk away out of conscience. Intellectual honesty. 2, no one will be able to talk or convince you into a testimony.
Okay.
I have to disagree with that one. I think there are lots of people who are convinced that the church is true because everyone around them believes that that's true.
Yeah, but would you say that they're trying to talk them into it?
No one will be able to talk or convince you into a testimony. I think that there are people who do that, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. 3, don't ignore small promptings of the Spirit.
Okay.
Whatever that means.
Right.
Going back to our first
Revelation.
conversation. Yeah. Like, what does that even mean? I don't know. 4, the brethren and the leadership within the church are not perfect, and that's okay. Didn't he already say this?
Yeah.
Yeah. 5, you're never going to gain a testimony through historical evidence.
No kidding.
No kidding.
And shouldn't that be like a huge red flag for you?
Right, and it's not even that people are saying that you can gain a testimony through historical evidence. It's that the historical evidence often contradicts what the church says, and so it can cause a lot of doubts.
Almost in every case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Moving on. Don't let what you don't know keep you from following what you do know. I feel like that was a repeat as well.
Yeah.
Come on, guy. 7. Align yourself spiritually.
Okay.
What do you think that means? Align yourself spiritually.
I mean, I feel like that has something to do with auras and chakras.
Exactly. Like, it sounds like he's trying to borrow New Age terminology and apply it to Mormonism.
I've actually started noticing that with some articles that I found online.
Oh, really?
Yeah, especially on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That might be kind of fun to go over.
Yeah, I mean, they don't like necessarily subscribe to the New Age stuff, but a lot of their wording reminds me of stuff like that, especially like aligning yourself spiritually. That's a phrase that I've been seeing come up quite often.
Interesting. Basically, all he's talking about in this is that you need to follow all the rules so that God can talk to you. Right. Because if you don't follow the rules, God will stop talking to you because he's kind of whiny. He doesn't like it when people don't follow what he says.
Yeah, he's a toddler.
He's a toddler. God is very immature. Number 8, remove yourself from any sin. That sounds a lot like the last one. Making sure you're following the right prohibitions.
Right.
And 9, turn to your local church leaders.
Of course, turn to them.
Of course, turn to them. Because
they're trained to help you.
Yeah, that's one of the things that has really bothered me a lot more having left the church. The fact that the lay clergy of the Mormon Church have zero training. You know, like the reason in anything, like
they don't even have training in public speaking.
Right. And they act as counselors, as therapists.
Yeah.
They give financial advice.
Yeah.
You know, and when people come to them with serious problems, they don't have real professional training to help people. And so they just give them the best advice they can.
Yeah.
And they try to be thoughtful and all that kind of stuff because, again, they're supposed to be inspired. And so a lot of people will take it seriously, as they should. But again, they don't have the training, you know. So the type of advice that you get isn't necessarily going to be good advice. Nope. And in fact, a lot of people, in fact, I can think of a friend of mine who is currently going through a faith crisis. He mentioned that his mother received some very bad advice. Oh, yeah. I won't get into any details, but, you know, and that is becoming a source of doubt for her. You know, and this is a lifelong member of the church. I think she's in her 60s, you know, so for her having a faith crisis in her 60s, good grief,
yeah,
like that just rocks a person. Yep. You know, I mean, I'm glad that I went through my faith crisis in my 20s, you know, even if it was late 20s, but still, you know, but I don't know. So that's all I have from the article. Did you have another article you want to go to?
It's just a really quick thing.
Okay. Yeah, just, so we can wrap this up soon.
So this is just in the March Ensign.
Okay.
It's under the heading Prophetic Promise, and it's from Dietrich Uchtdorf. And the title of it is We Can Choose to Believe. So, quote, I testify that even in the toughest of times, the Savior will say to you, as he said to an anxious father on a crowded street in Galilee, be not afraid, only believe. We can choose to believe, for in belief we discover the dawn of light. We will discover the truth. We will find peace. Because of our belief, we will never hunger, never thirst. The gifts of God's grace will enable us to be true to our faith and will fill our soul like a well of water springing up into everlasting life. We will experience true and lasting joy. And I basically just wanted to bring that up because of the phrase, we can choose to believe.
Yeah, that's what stood out to me.
Yeah. And, I mean, I feel like that coming from Uchtdorf, especially after General Conference, where he was, you know, basically saying if you don't believe, you're weak. Skeptics aren't, I don't know, intelligent people.
Skepticism is easy. Anybody can do it.
Yeah, that stuff. Yeah. And so I thought it was interesting that he's the one saying we can choose to believe. It just goes hand in hand with that. Skepticism is easy. Yeah. He's saying we're choosing not to believe, and we can choose to believe again. Yeah, which I don't agree with at all.
I don't agree with that. And I've heard a lot of people talk about this in the atheist community about choosing to believe. And, the more I think about it and the more I hear other people talk about it, belief is not a choice. You can deny that you believe something, or you can suppress your true thoughts or feelings about a topic, but you can't really make yourself believe something.
Right.
No matter how much...
You can only pretend.
Right. No matter how much I say that I believe I can fly, I am never going to get on top of a roof and jump off.
Right.
You
Or
know?
something as simple as Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or
Right.
leprechauns. You can say you believe them, but do you actually believe in that? It's like, I no longer believe in those things. I can't just suddenly be like, I believe in Santa.
Right. You can't
And then
choose
expect
that.
my stocking to be full on Christmas. You just can't choose to believe something.
Yeah.
You can do research in something and eventually come to the conclusion that something is right or true or legitimate, but you can't just choose to believe something without evidence supporting it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
that's all
agree.
I really wanted
And-
to say about that.
Yeah, and Mormons will point to the feelings that they feel and call revelation as the evidence.
Yeah.
They look for evidence too. They just have a very... I would call
It's
it
just
a
not legit
lower
evidence.
I would call it a lower standard of evidence than
Yeah.
what I would use.
So much lower. Yeah.
But
Because it can't be shared with anyone else. Evidence is true for like
anybody.
So, yep, that's all I wanted to say on that one.
Okay. Cool. Well, I think that is our show.
Thanks for listening.
If you would like to contact us, you can email us at skepticsquaredpodcast@gmail.com. You can check out the show's blog at www.skepticsquaredpodcast.blogspot.com. We are on iTunes. You can rate us and review us there. We are on various other devices. I'm not even sure what the list is exactly, but I've been told that we're on different devices. So rate us, review us, let us know what you think. If you want to join the conversation, you can do so by getting into contact with us. And that's our show. I feel
See
like I kind of rambled at the end there.